governance invited to the next edition of the Fireplace Conversations, focusing on shareholder centricity versus public interest. Featuring Professor Dunia Zongwe and Mr. Heinrich Gaomab, this conversation will explore the balance between shareholder interest and broader public responsibilities in corporate governance. Join host Edla Gaomab for an engaging discussion on how organizations can balance shareholder expectations with their responsibilities to stakeholders, communities, and the broader public interest. Be part of the conversation live on the NICG and the Namibian Facebook pages or attend in person. To reserve your seat, contact 081 666 8645 or email training.events@nicg.org.na. Fireplace Conversations, proudly supported by 91 Namibia.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's NICG Fireplace Conversations. This is our last episode of the series, so welcome to those of you who've been with us all this time. Thank you so much, and welcome to my guests tonight. If you haven't seen the ones before, we encourage you to go onto all our platforms and see the previous episodes. But tonight's episode is about shareholder centricity versus public interest. We all start businesses. We want to maximize our profits. We start businesses for a reason. But then there's a call for us to want to, to need to look at public interest or the environment and so on. But, where's the balance? How do we do that? Tonight, I'm going to talk to these distinguished gentlemen to find that balance, to find, what should we actually focus on. But before we get into it, I want to thank the series sponsor. They sponsored every single episode, and we are so thankful to 91, one of the best in investment and asset managing entities in the country and on the continent. Thank you so much, 91. And so let's get into it. Tonight's two guests approach the question of shareholder centricity versus public interest from very different intellectual homes. Yeah, the best governance conversations happen when there's tension, so we're looking forward to that. Professor Dunia Zongwe, I mustn't say it like a hero, Zongwe. Professor Dunia Zongwe is an associate professor in the School of Law at the University of Namibia, where he teaches and researches at the intersection of finance, law, and economics. Decoloniality, there's something new I'm learning. Human rights and commercial law. He is a fellow of the Southern African Institute of African Development, a World Bank consultant. Yes, I've got an email. Of more than a decade, and a published author of 4 books and over 60 articles appearing in law reviews, including the Peking University Journal of Legal Studies and the American University International Law Review. He holds a cum laude LLB from UNAM and earned his master's and doctoral degree at Cornell University, where his doctoral dissertation examined foreign direct investment in African mining sectors. Very key for what's happening in our country. Yeah, it's a very relevant topic. He has presented at Cambridge, Yale, the African Union, and more than 100 conferences worldwide. I want you to adopt me. He has consulted for the World Bank, UNESCO, the Namibian Competition Commission, and others. His recent writings ask a radical question, whether Namibia, 35 years after independence, should move from an imported liberal governance framework towards one grounded in Ubuntu and African constitutionalism. He is here tonight to challenge our frameworks, not just our conclusions. So this is exactly what this episode needs. Welcome, Professor Zongwe.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Yes, please hold that. Yes, thank you. Mr. Heinrich Mihe, my brother's namesake, I see. Mr. Heinrich Mihe Gaomab II is one of the most credentialized economists in Namibia, and one of the few people in this country who has thought about corporate governance, competition policy, development finance, and public interest, not as separate disciplines, but as parts of the same equation or question. He was the founding CEO of the Namibian Competition Commission, good work, which means he spent years at the front line of the tension between corporate power and public interest, investigating restrictive business practices and merger regulations. He served as the executive director at the African Development Bank, overseeing development financing for 54 African countries and chairing the Committee on Development Effectiveness and ESG Policy. Wow. He's the founding CEO of NIDA, the founding president of the Namibian Economic Society and currently a GIPF trustee. His board experience spans Capricorn Group, where he chaired the investment committee and served on the Sustainability, Social and Ethics Committee. GIPF, Fishco, CRAN, I don't know now, IPPR, the Electoral Commission of Namibia, and the National Planning Commission. He is an honorary member of both NICG and the Institute of Directors in Southern Africa. Thank you so much for your patronage. He holds a Master of Science in Quantitative Development Economics, your brainiac as well, from the University of Warwick, and brings over 30 years of economic thinking to this fireplace tonight. Mr. Gaomab, welcome. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes, let's get into it. Okay, so there's a man called Milton Friedman, who is an economist from the United States. He even won a economic Nobel Prize. So he said that he came up with the theory that companies exist to enrich shareholders. I'm paraphrasing, right? They exist to make the shareholder rich. And that's how a lot of methodology was birthed, and a lot of what is being studied in business schools. That was about 50 years ago. And then about 20 years later, the King Committee came and they started saying, no, you should not just think about shareholders, you should think more about stakeholders. Because you just thinking about the company or enriching the shareholders could have detrimental effects on the environment, on your stuff, basically ESG things. So who's right? Who was right? And does that answer change depending on whether we are talking about a listed company, a state-owned enterprise, or company operating in Africa? Who's older?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zongwe. I appreciate your innovativeness and efficiency and effectiveness in terms of making the Namibian Institute of Corporate Governance a true institution at home.
Thank you.
And coming back to your question, which is very, very pertinent. I mean, Milton Friedman is known for monetarism. In other words, how does monetary policy influence the economic agents to operate better in the marketplace? But I think one thing that he didn't realize is that there's a limitation when it comes to pumping too much money, chasing too few goods. And that's where inflation comes in. And that's where inflation becomes the issue. And that's where the interest rate structure started to take its place to say, okay, then in order to contain inflation, in order to contain the expectations, let's rather increase the interest rates to keep the money supply contained in the economy. So it's very important. This is a very important one. Because why I'm saying that is America has always been feeling blessed because of their democratic experiment or democratization. But the market stock collapsed in
2008.
1929.
Oh.
And then with Russell Johnson becoming the president,
yeah.
and also the aftermath of the the Nazi kind of elements, they realized that unlimited freedom can have limitations.
Right.
And that is where the market actually crashed, and it caused favorable standard of living, even in America. And that's where the government thought, let's get in, let's regulate, and let's stop this. And there was this bootlegging issue about alcoholic ban and so on, but it never worked because you create a black market for the alcohol. So from that point of view, there's always a limitation when it comes to economics. The wants, desires, needs, and also the element of policies. And with that comes capacity, credibility, competence, and adherence to a certain set of standards. As you talk about the ESG, and we may get into that later on. So I hope I have answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, picking our brain with other things, but yes, go ahead.
Yes, so Milton Friedman is a very influential economist. He's even one of the founders of the neoliberal school, which that they refer to as the Chicago School of Economics. And they believe in the market, privatization, stabilization, liberalization. So how does it now relate to the question that you've asked us, who was right when it comes to stakeholder primacy, which is what you were also mentioning. When he said it in 1970, he was actually mentioning it in the context that sometimes those who criticize them, do not take into account. He was actually saying that because companies and directors actually dealing with other people's money, they should remember that they are accountable to shareholders primarily.
Sure.
But of course he endorsed the interpretations that came afterwards, because it's true that neoliberal economics believe that profit is a reflection of efficiency, in the sense that it's an efficient allocation of resources to the economy. So profit is good not only for the economy, but it's also good primarily for the shareholders. Now, who was right between King and Friedman? I would say that it depends. It was in your question as well. It depends on which company you're dealing with. Because if you look at publicly traded companies, I mean those listed on the Namibia Stock Exchange, it's very unlikely that they would think of other stakeholders as the primary stakeholders. They primarily think of the shareholders. And the same could be said with some adaptation when it comes to a private company. But Milton's idea, that statement that you quoted, collapses completely when it comes to SOE. Why? Because here the shareholder is the public. The Namibian citizens and taxpayers are the one who created state-owned enterprises. So they receive their legal personality, their perpetual existence, and the limited liability. They all get that through the people, because we passed the Companies Act that says that if your business entity is registered, then it's going to be protected from certain lawsuits. It tells you that it will have a separate legal personality, so that the entrepreneurs, the owners of the business, will not see their assets, being seized in case of of a lawsuit for a debt or contractual debt. So all these benefits that companies have come through the people, through the parliament, of course, because it has to come through legislation and so forth. So the statement will not really work with state-owned enterprises, also because they have a very clearly public mandate as opposed to other companies. Now, under PEGA 2019, now I'll finish soon. PEGA 2019, what the law tried to, PEGA's, as you know, the
Public Enterprise Governance.
Governance Act of 2019, the idea was to separate, to have two types of SOEs. Those that are commercial and those who are expected to make a profit on the one hand, and then on the other hand, those were the purely public developmental mandate. So the statement about shareholders, if by that we think profit to be given to the main shareholder, could apply to some extent for commercial SOEs, but not so much for the developmental ones.
Explain that, because if we're thinking shareholder value, and especially in the fifth iteration, it's not so much about good performance and value creation, and we're thinking value creation for the shareholder. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. So so if we're thinking that, then why does it collapse for public enterprises? And also, I'm thinking when we do it for, say, profit-making companies, and we want to maximize shareholder, it then leads to an unintended consequence of where people now just want to make money and thinking short-term versus long-term. So could that also not be a way to collapse? So I want to know why it doesn't collapse for the one but collapses for the other, and why does it collapse for?
Yes. Well, generally speaking, what I was saying is that it applies less to state-owned enterprises. But within state-owned enterprises, we have to distinguish between, at least that's what the law currently says, we have to distinguish between the commercial SOEs and then the non-commercial SOEs. By the adjective used, commercial, which is related to profit-making, to profit-driven commerce or trade, the idea here is that the companies, the SOE, will be assessed, their performance will be assessed based on whether or not they are profitable.
Oh, okay.
But for commercial, and this is where your question I think becomes very pertinent, for the non-commercial SOEs, because of the public mandate, the developmental mandate, here they will not be assessed based on whether they are making a profit or not. But personally, what I argue is that it should be it should be assessed on the basis of efficiency still.
Yes.
But whether they make a profit, the activity in which they engage may not be profitable in itself. So with those those companies, if you were to apply the Milton Friedman statement that the sole responsibility of companies is to create value for the shareholders or to make profit for the shareholders, it will not apply. First of all, because as I said, the shareholder in this case, you're not dealing with a group of private individuals, you're dealing with the public. The public, in theory, it's basically the Namibian citizenry.
Yes.
Yes. So that's why I say it collapses, and the collapse I'm saying it doesn't apply entirely. Yes. For a that statement for a company that operates, for example, in Africa, would be different. If you are talking about KFC, all these multinational operating in Namibia, the stakeholder, the statement that it is only accountable and its primary function is to make profits for the shareholder may make a lot of sense, although it does not, I don't believe that it prevents them from engaging in activities such as what they call corporate social responsibility, trying to see in what ways their activities can also benefit the surrounding communities, whether they can invest in schools, hospitals, and some companies are already doing that. So it applies at different levels, but I think where it applies less is with companies that already embody the citizenry and companies that have a developmental mandate, because that developmental mandate may actually mean that they are not making profits for the shareholders, but that they are creating value, which is different. Value may not be monetary terms, and it's important to make that distinction very clearly. Yes. So who is right? In conclusion, I would say when it comes to accountability, some would say most likely Milton Friedman, but when it comes to the purpose of these companies, what they must be pursuing, then definitely Melvin King would be the one who's right. In Namibia, I don't think we should think in terms of one or the other. We should find a way of balancing both purpose and
especially
purpose and accountability.
Right, because I don't think Melvin necessarily, is against value for the shareholder. It's just that we balance this value, I think. Please go ahead.
Well, and I fully agree with my colleague from the law side especially. But the important thing to note in African context is that Namibia is a developmental state.
Yeah.
So the shareholder expectations will always be there. Expectation. Whether it's a young minister or it's an old minister, the point is a developmental state depends on government policies and programs. Now, where the legislative context comes in is where, acts have been promulgated, and those acts are very important. For example, in the case of the Commission, the act was passed in 2009. I came in 2000. The act was passed in 2003. I came in 2009. Yeah, and there was nothing. No one understood what the Competition Commission was supposed to do. And there was this talk of bringing in foreign experts and all that. But I said no. Let me rather inculcate and develop local capacity, the youth, for example. So from that point of view, I'm trying to just attune to the public that there is no way that government involvement in terms of parastatal efficiency or governance, corporate governance, is going to be negated. They were in essence to have a place, and maybe I'm glad that you mentioned about centricity, but to me it's about shareholder activism, it's about shareholder dynamic, and how the shareholder extend its role towards the board and give a delegated authority to the board in order to run it along corporate governance principles. Now, where maybe governance failure comes in, perhaps it could be vested interest. It depends. And what are those vested interests? Yeah. And from that point of view, we have to appreciate the fact that we cannot run away from that. Of course, in democratic societies like America, the antitrust laws and so on in Europe, there could be less interference. But we are a developmental state, and the government have to play its role towards what we want to do, whether it's parastatal, public, or private. Yeah. And I'll come back to that.
Yeah, because what we're trying to figure out, to work out here is the balance, right? Because, like we said, when you start a business, you want to profit from it, or you don't start it because you want to be nice. You provide a service because you want to So the issue is not that there shouldn't be value for the shareholder. It's that value to the shareholder should not undermine value to the rest of the stakeholders, whether it's your staff members, whether it's the community working, or whether it's the environment. So how do we hold that together, and who decides, whose interest whose interest should be, regarded more? And when we're talking public interest, we're not necessarily talking corporate social responsibility, because sure, that's one way, but it's talking about, for example, when a bank has a product, whether that product is fair, whether it's delivering what it says it would, that kind of public interest in that sense. But yeah, so I think how do we balance that interest in terms of whose needs should be regarded higher or not?
Yes, well, that is a challenge, and it was also one of the criticism that was leveled by Michael Jensen, who's associated with the agency theory of corporate governance. You were saying that when we're talking about balance, but he says you will have difficulty to balance. Right. Because if you think of the shareholder as the principal and the board of directors as the agents, what is their mandate? Because some of these principles have they will have a conflicting and in some cases contradictory mandate.
Sure.
What will be beneficial for employees, for example, may not be beneficial for the owners. And what will be, for example, beneficial for the surrounding communities will not be beneficial for, let's say, the owners again. So how do you manage this? I think the first thing to say is to remember the hierarchy of duties. When you look at the common law, and if you look at it from that perspective, you realize that the duties are primarily owed to the company,
yes,
and not to particular individuals or constituencies. So when we talk about the fiduciary duty of good faith, of avoiding conflict of interest, the directors owe a duty to the company, because remember, we spoke about this, the legal personality of the company means that in the eyes of the law, the company is a separate person, and loyalty must be to the company. So in terms of how do we balance that, the first thing is to remember that.
What is the best for the company?
What is best for the company? And then the company will be now seeing what other stakeholders they can satisfy. The scholar Lynn Stout, who came up with a different theory, she narrowed the group of stakeholders, because stakeholders, like Edward Freeman presented it, is those who can impact the achievement of the objective of a company, or those who are impacted by it. Now, what Lynn Stout says that not every stakeholders, not every stakeholder will be material. The material one should be the one who have invested in it. So, for example, for an SOE, it will be the people, etc., etc. But then, if, for example, you're talking about a private company, those who have invested their time, for example, workers, resources, they will be the material stakeholders. But maybe some of.
We've lost sound?
Yes, it's back. So yes, so it can help in the balancing act, because you have a fewer constituency to take into account. It may make the mandate easier. But the other thing also we shouldn't forget is how do we balance that. It's important to look at the current legislation, because many of the public interest, many of the public considerations, developmental objectives are found in different pieces of legislation. If you look at the Competition Act itself of 2003, you see a list of public interest, public consideration to take into account, including employment and so forth and so forth. So what I'm trying to say here is that maybe the third thing to balance, apart from the hierarchy of duties and which constituency is material or not, the third one, I think, and very importantly, is the rule of law.
Yeah, to define what the that defines perhaps what the public interest is, or
excuse me.
The rule of law, which is defining, or what the public interest.
No. I'm saying that the public interest is already contained in several pieces of legislation.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
So really, the way to balance would consist in just abiding by the law.
Exactly.
The rule of law as opposed to the rule of man, specific individuals or highly connected individuals, because the public interest is already there. So how the way you would a balance that is to make sure that the rule of law is implemented, because public interest will not will be served by the rule of law and not
Yes.
and it will be protected by the rule of law. It
Yes.
will not be protected from it. From the rule of law. The rule of law is central.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No. So that was
Okay,
good.
I just want to add,
Yeah.
and I think my learned friend actually pinpoints that the constitutionality, the constitution of the Republic of Namibia is paramount in terms of how we balance the shareholder versus public interest concerns. It's
Yeah.
very clear.
Yeah.
And the constitution does allow that. And I will give you a practical example about the Competition Commission. We had a huge merger that involved Walmart. This is one of the biggest corporate
It
citizens.
involved who?
Walmart.
Walmart. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Walmart, yeah.
Mhm.
And it was huge.
Mhm.
In fact, they even announced us on TV in the United States that a tiny African country is preventing us from entering.
Mhm.
Now, I had to balance the issue of the competition law,
Right.
which is a rule of law,
Mm.
against the public expectations. So, the
What
point
was that? Explain that.
that was in 2013.
What I mean, what is it that you were
I was,
protecting?
I was balancing the need of Walmart coming into our country
Mhm.
against the potential losses that may emanate from their presence here in Namibia.
To
And
other entities. Oh.
they wanted to buy a game, they wanted to buy cash and carry, they wanted to buy quite a number of book cabbage. They vehemently wanted to sell it. But the point is that the minister has got some empowering powers in terms of the law when it comes to matters in acquisition. So eventually I had to ask, what is it that I must do as a CEO? First and foremost, how do I approach this? I can easily just write a paper and then say, Walmart, come in. After all, they are the biggest corporations, and they came, 6 of them, big executives. But the point that I was looking at was, what is their presence going to do in terms of the public, which is employment, SME development, welfare considerations, and also the pricing structures, whether it's imported or whether it is going to produce tomatoes at Stamrit or what, and outcompete them and just bring in the Walmart products here in Namibia.
Wow.
So that is actually from that point of view, that one is to, the balancing act is not necessarily one size fits all.
Yeah.
It is about first networking, talking to the people that affects them, have a conferencing so that you can get out the salient features of the public interest, and then use that as a balancing act towards how the decision will be. And in fact, we declined Walmart. We
can see they are not here.
We said yes, but then they took us to the Supreme Court.
Oh, let's.
So it became the rule of law, and that was it.
Okay.
Yeah, but it became political too.
Yeah.
So it's no small, not all size fits all.
Yeah.
But the important thing is as a CEO, as a chairman of the board, of which I have experience of, one has to look at all those issues from a balancing perspective. So one cannot take away the other. It's like a husband and wife. You are married, and you got to find you got to find the balancing act, getting the marriage going. Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. No, I get it. No, that's really good. Professor Zongwe, you have written about Ubuntu as an alternative governance philosophy, grounded in African communitarian values. What would corporate governance look like if it were genuinely built on Ubuntu rather than on shareholder primacy? And is that a realistic aspiration, or perhaps?
Yes, well, the accusation that those who advocate for Ubuntu, they are romanticizing our African traditional, values. But I'll come back to that. It is doable, and some may even argue that to a certain extent it's already integrated into the NAM code. If you look at the NAM code,
explain it. Maybe explain what it looks like.
Yes, but I have to start by making this point very clear, because I'm currently working on a book project on corporate governance in Namibia, and something that must be said on the outset is that although Ubuntu is the moral foundation of the NAM code is it is, I'll use the word counterfeited Ubuntu, because what you see there is not Ubuntu stakeholder theory, not shareholder primacy, but stakeholder theory, and it's not exactly what Ubuntu would, what you would imply from Ubuntu. And it's also very important to mention that in 1984, Edward Freeman was the person credited with coming up with the stakeholder theory when he came up with this way of looking at management. His book was Strategic Management, a Stakeholder Approach. It's a classic now in both management and corporate governance. But when he was writing the book, and the context in which the book was written was for an industrialized economy that was seeking to optimize the operations of firms beyond making profits from shareholders. So it's in opposition to the shareholder primacy, but that doesn't mean that it embodies fully the values of Ubuntu. If we have to mention them, we'd say Ubuntu talks about things like solidarity, dignity, solidarity, dignity, responsibility. Those are core values, core principles of Ubuntu. But apart from the few mentioned in the NAM code, where they mention, 4 times, and three times, and let's not forget that the NAM code itself is based on the King Code.
The King 3, though.
King Code 3.
Yeah.
It's important to mention that it's not exactly what Ubuntu would have done. Other theories could embody the values of Ubuntu, like the ones that I've mentioned: the community value, responsibility, dignity. For example, the developmental state that our Mr. Gaomab has already mentioned. The development state has the advantage compared to the stakeholder theory of having been developed in the experiences of the Asian tigers. We are talking about Singapore, Taiwan, and so forth. So it comes from a global south developing country context, right, as opposed to an industrialized context. Now, so how will it look like if, for example, Ubuntu was a more central rather than moral background? For example, the issue of accountability, it would have created a very strict regime of accountability, because let's not forget, with Ubuntu we say that I am a person through other people. Right. So I am a person, I am because we are. Yeah. So if that is true, then stealing from the community will diminish my own humanity. So it creates a standard of accountability that is stronger than what you currently see. Ethics. Yeah, and ethics. So that's very important. And it sees relationship as an asset. So what does it mean? It means that in a board of directors, for example, they take seriously the fact that members of the community should be there. For example, the surrounding community, that representative of workers, the different people, the different, let's say, constituents or components of the community are fairly represented in that. That, for example, that there is a plural form of corporations, because currently the main corporate form is the one that we've inherited from the 19th century. And the very famous case of Solomon versus Solomon is the one that is credited for saying that the company has a different personal legal personality. And remember, that concept was created for the problem that existed in 19th century Europe. And that was, how do we pool the private capital of dispersed, let's say, people? That doesn't work in our context, because private capital is not dispersed in Namibia. It's actually concentrated. The Gini coefficient of Namibia indicates that we are the second most unequal society in the world after South Africa. So that model may not be appropriate for it, but that's what you see being championed in stakeholder theory and etc. But then what would be, and still dealing with the relationship, taking relationship seriously, if we are to implement Ubuntu, it also includes things like community trust, cooperatives, which are forms where, business entities, not necessarily business entities, but they can be used for commercial purposes, but institutions where the members are also the owners, as opposed to what you see currently, where the owners, the managers, and those who work for the company are actually different constituencies. So lastly, I would say the issue also of transparency. That is something that is currently in the stakeholder theory. So in that sense, there is it resembles, they intersect. But transparency would also be heavily emphasized, because if you say that through Ubuntu you have greater accountability to the community, it would also require that there's more transparency to the community, because you cannot account properly if people don't know what you are doing. So as in a system that would be inspired by Ubuntu, it wouldn't make sense even for an SOE to have 4 or 5 years without publishing any annual reports, because it means that the people, through Parliament especially, do not know what the company has done, what is the value they've created for the community. And of course here, community is really mentioned in a very broad sense. So it is not impossible if we can agree that to a lesser extent Ubuntu works through the NAM code. It's an indication that it's a viable, it's a possible system. Although, like I said, the Ubuntu that I see in the NAM code, and all those who are interested in the Ubuntu may see that this doesn't look like real Ubuntu like we think of it. It sounds more like a westernization or Europeanization of Ubuntu, as opposed to Ubuntu itself. Yes.
Interesting. I just wanted, before we go there, sorry, Mr. Gaomab, I just want to say we are reviewing the NAM code. We have started, and we will, do a wide stakeholder consultation, so we can, get some of these nuggets in there. Thank you.
Gaomab, I also wanted to say we are reviewing the NAM code, and I appreciate the Ubuntu principle. Apart from what happened migration-wise in South Africa, which is a very unfortunate. Unfortunate. But I also just want to allude that private companies are there for profitability. Their profit motive is strong. Okay, corporate social responsibility aside, I think there is now an evolving issue towards aligning themselves to the United Nations Principle of Responsible Investment, UNPRI, as well as the environmental, social, and governance goals, which is the ESG. Now, the point is CSR, corporate social responsibility, just extend towards trying to help the community, trying to be relevant, but it doesn't provide a sustainable effort of grounding in the social rate of return. Because private companies are about the economic rate of return. But which private company will eventually go and improve the Karuturi Hospital, for example? That has to come from the element of a public sector economics, and where the infrastructure is actually used to the extent that the capital injection from the private companies may be limited.
Yeah.
And that's where the role of government comes in. And one cannot negate the shareholder activism towards that perspective, because that is from the NDP 6. It's from the element of aligning themselves towards certain pillars that they have to be able, and it's actually a wonderful document. It's got indicators, the outcomes, and it also looks at now new evolving issues like that, the creative industries for youth, sports. I mean, it's the things that we used to talk about, but now things are eventually happening, and I think we ought to give some commendable effort towards that.
No, I'm noticing when you're speaking of the shareholder, you're speaking of government as shareholder. When you're speaking of shareholder, you're speaking of the society as shareholder. So that's quite interesting. But no, let me ask you the next question, because then you can talk, right? Because we're talking about because you mentioned this earlier about unequal. You talked about us being unequal. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, as Namibia is one of the most unequal societies in the world with enormous corporate concentration, from a competition economic standpoint, when markets are this concentrated, can shareholder value maximization ever genuinely serve public interest? I think you started talking about that. Or does concentration itself make stakeholder governance structurally impossible?
Madam, it's a very good question, and you're asking a very innovative and very necessary question in the context of us as being a developmental state. Concentration is very bad for any economy. Over-concentrated with a market credit risk is bad for any competition. And a good competition is actually good for the economy. But what happens is that there are collusive aspects of it, restrictive business practice aspect of it, monopolization of capital in the hands of the few, and also the element of how the private sector themselves are to be blamed for not following some proper rules. Now, if you break down those barriers, which are called barriers to entry in economics, if you break down those barriers, collusion and all that, then that can actually give space and breathing space towards like small and medium enterprises can give breathing space towards, the vendors in the street to sell goods. Because you'll be amazed how some of the people, the vendors, are actually the economic agents of change in this country, not the big companies. Now, where the wealth is concentrated, and which is in South Africa and Namibia, we are actually in Brazil, I think. We are actually, one of the most unequal societies. And we are asking ourselves then, if we have money and Namibia is too few to be poor, where does the money go to? Now, the concentration, that collusiveness, that is not trickled down. The trickle down effect is not really materialized. According to Friedman, Karl Marx, the assembly line, all that, the whole economic fundamentals of economic theory have now started to be taken over by the youth asking themselves, well, why can't I get a job? And it comes down to technological division now. Yeah? Why is it that no jobs are created, but yet the economy is growing? So that means that there's some structural imbalance, the forward and backward linkages in the economy that is really not holding ground to create jobs. And that also means that, in a way, that the few seems to be concentrating their wealth in their hands and not want to share. And this is a very important question because it's a ticking time bomb.
It brings us to the next question, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
like you're saying so many things that I'm going to make us digress, because then I want to go into that. But I want us to, focus on what we're talking about tonight in terms of, public interest versus the shareholders' interest. But I like what you bring, because I think it kind of goes into the next question. Because Namibia is on the eve of potential oil and gas transformation. I mean, it's really exciting. The oil and gas conference is on its last day today, and it's really, it creates a lot of hope and excitement. So the governance decisions made in the next 5 years about who benefits, how and through what structures will shape this country for generations. What does shareholder-centric governance produce in a resource boom, and what does public interest governance require instead?
To some extent, the part that deals with the shareholder, what the shareholder primacy, what will it bring, and then what now the stakeholder or the public interest approach would bring. The shareholder part, to some extent, has been answered by Mr. Gaomab in the sense that if companies are only to pursue profit and nothing else, because Milton was talking about the soul and the social responsibility of companies is to make a profit. It will not work in context of huge inequality or the inequalities that we see, for example, in the region, which is historical because of apartheid. You see it in Botswana, South Africa, Namibia. So it's important to have public interest coming in, even when we deal with oil and gas, and more importantly, oil and gas. In my own doctoral dissertation studies, when I was looking at foreign investment in Africa, I was looking at foreign investment in the mining sectors of Africa. So the theoretical framework, which is actually enriched by years, decades of experience, was that there is a resource curse. I don't think that the resource curse really applies to Namibia, considering that Namibia is ranked very highly in terms of the quality of governance. But that's when it's important to have institutions, strong institutions, and those strong institutions must be established before the first oil barrel is actually taken out of the ground. So Milton's prescription will not work in a context of a country that is very wealthy in terms of oil, of natural resources like Namibia, and asking companies to only pursue a private interest. But if we're talking about now the stakeholder theory will not be able to prevent certain things that can come with oil-rich, resource-rich countries. And the first one that I think about is the enclave economics. If you look, for example, at what happens in several oil-rich countries in Africa, what happens is that the oil is exploited offshore, like in Angola. The profit is often repatriated offshore, and even when the oil is extracted, it is going to enrich. The value addition goes to refineries in other countries. So the corporate governance system that has to be adopted will have to create incentives for companies to try to eliminate the enclave economic so that it benefits the broader economy. So that is the first thing that I believe that the stakeholder theory may not be entirely capable of removing. The second one that I can think of has something to do with rent seeking.
To do with what?
Rent seeking.
Oh, okay.
Because again, like Mr. Gaomab has said, it's a fact that Namibia is incredibly wealthy with a small population, but that wealth is disproportionately concentrated in the hands of a few.
Certain people,
But like what we saw with the fish rot, when a government official has a lot of power, discretionary power, and we are dealing with resources like marine resources, and again here Namibia is some of the most productive fishing grounds in Africa, if not in the world. So it gives the minister, it makes in a sense the minister vulnerable, because private interests will come to the minister. They will put pressure. They say, no, you have to allow us to have access to the oil, and all of that. So the corporate governance system must be such that there's not going to be another fish corps. That they will be able to stick to the rules and create an institutional environment that allows them to resist that kind of pressure, even if it comes from the minister, who may himself be under the pressure of private powerful interest. So that is something that I was also thinking that the stakeholder theory, which is the current system currently, if you look at the NAM code, it's not a binding instrument. Companies are not legally obliged, although I think the incentive is stronger for companies that are listed on the Namibia Stock Exchange. But it's not, if you do not comply with it, you just have to explain, it's apply or explain. You don't have to, it's not that sense binding. But still, when you ask yourself the question, will the stakeholder theory or stakeholder code, like the NAM code or the King code, will it be in a position to resist the kind of things that we have seen with other oil-rich countries, in terms of enclave economics, rent seeking, and the fact that you are also dealing, we alluded to that, the fact that when wealth is so concentrated, it's a network, in a sense, network economy, where basically wealth circulates among an elite that is highly connected. So how do we overcome that so that oil becomes beneficial, not just for the entrepreneurs, but for the society at large? As I was saying, Ubuntu is mentioned in the NAM code, but Ubuntu doesn't need, for example, to be held up by a European theory for it to have respectability. It's possible to have a code that is, of course, based on evidence and experience in other jurisdictions and the experience that we have had in the past 35 years, but one that reflects the reality of Namibia, as opposed to, as I was saying, the stakeholder theory, which was written in the context of an industrialized economy. So that is a point also. An industrial economy where wealth is dispersed among several people and not concentrated in the hands of a few highly powerful people. And also it's important to mention that in the context in which that theory emerged, we are talking about financial markets that were very deep. The depth of financial markets in many developing countries is not that deep. So this is things to take into account. It is possible, as I said, Namibia's greatest asset is the fact that comparatively, the quality of governance is rated very high. And when I'm saying this, I'm referring to the index of the Mo Ibrahim Index, which annually or regularly, ranks countries in terms of the quality of governance. But when scholars refer to the resource curse, they're not just saying that people may not, the majority may not necessarily benefit from oil resources because those oil resources create perverse incentives. But the problem is that it also undermines very democratic institutions. And the best example here would be Ghana, where we saw that the oil wealth ended up undermining some of the democratic credentials and the experience, the long history of democratic governance that Ghana had. So it's it's an important question that you're asking. I'm not claiming that I'm going to answer it here in this very important conversation, but we should ask ourselves this question: is the stakeholder theory that is currently embedded in the NAM code and the King code the best theory or the best idea, let's not call it ideology, but the best philosophy to tackle these challenges that you've mentioned. Let's not forget that it's not the only philosophy that align with Ubuntu. We've talked about the developmental state, which gives an important role to the state, but the state here emphasizes on developmental efficiency. So those are things to consider.
Okay. I'd like to hear you, because you started this and you went us on that. But I think I would also want you to maybe unpack what he's saying, because I think the spirit of stakeholder theory, or stakeholder inclusivity, and not so much based on stakeholder theory, but stakeholder inclusivity, I can see why it is not anonymous, but running parallel with Ubuntu, because it is about not just me as the one who's benefited from the organization, but thinking about how do my actions and my decisions affect, so that, because when we're thinking shareholder centricity, it is that, because where this came from is then executives and directors' remuneration were pegged to the share price, for example. So then they would be then incentivized to push up, to get money so that the share price could increase so that they could get money, which then inadvertently led to them then thinking short term, because if the ocean is damaged or the environment, that's somebody else's problem in 5 years' time. So we wanna bring it back to, as a director, if you're sitting on a board, how do you manage this? How do you then, whether it's the minister as well, not fall under this pressure to enrich myself, but also enrich my owner, to the detriment of the other stakeholders, whether it's the environment, whether it's the community, whether it's the staff, in that sense.
Yes. I mean,
and we are running out of time. So
you're absolutely right. You see, the oil and gas, as you mentioned, resource gas, that's disease phenomenon. We call them because of from Netherlands. Can actually bring about a lot of volatility when it comes to macroeconomic variables.
What brings out what?
A lot of volatility, fluctuations can actually imbalance the balance of the economy. So oil and gas is a positive outcome, can also have its own curse when it comes to
100%.
Eventually the exploration and when the first oil will be released, which I think it won't be before 2030. And as an economist, we need to be very cautiously optimistic about the oil and gas. And I understand why the presidency is actually putting their hands into it to make sure it doesn't get out of bounds. But the point is that private companies are here and they are keen, and it looks positive going forward. But coming back to the fish road, I was a chairman of Fish Score, not Fish Road. Now, when I was asked by the minister to come and stabilize the economy, I wasn't looking at Fish Road. I was looking at Fish Score, the corporation itself. Yeah. So the legislative context, the Marine Resources Act, the act itself, in the context of how do you balance the stakeholder expectations of Fish Score vis-a-vis my role as a board, as a chairman of the board. And it was very interesting. I came down to low rates, and suddenly I was hearing my name being mentioned outside. And I was asking the CEO, what is happening? So when I came out, there were 400 employees thinking about my name, but in a way to say, do something. Okay. So when I went back, I realized that Bank of Namibia has imposed, in fact, suspended all the activities in operational and investment and all that. And then I asked, but 400 times 2 or 3?
Mr. Gaomab, I'm so lost right now. Help me understand where,
in terms of the shareholder, the shareholder expectation is that you need to take care of your employees. You need to do it according to the legislation. Right. So I'm asking, if it's the case that another stakeholder, which is Bank of Namibia, in terms of the exchange control, wants to now leverage this upon a Fish Road scandal, that's not my role. My role as a chairman of the board is to make sure that all those employees are catered for. Right. And for 3 months they were not paid. So I had to sit on my legs to the governor of the Bank of Namibia and ask, brother, you gotta do something, otherwise there's gonna be explosion. Right. Loot rate in itself is also an explosion. So Fish Score is actually the engine for the Southern African part of Namibia. But I don't want to sound theoretical, because as an economist, I have told myself that, it's better to rally the message from experience as well. But I understand the Ubuntu philosophy, the aspect of the resource cares, and also the aspect of we really need to address the income inequality. There are there. And how do we also give actually these licensing requirements, the exploration in terms of oil and gas? How is that playing out? The blocks. Who is first? We did a lot, $500 million was spent to try and bring about investments here. So cautious optimism is key. Yeah. But I guess I did not go off the topic. Yeah.
No,
I just wanted to make it more practical and highly relevant. And even as the founding CEO of the Namibia Industrial Development Agency, there's a lot of scope that we can do. Value addition is the lack of forward and backward linkages that actually holds us back to that extent. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah, very wide, very broadly applied. In terms of what we're talking about now, the practical implications of what it actually look like when you are the one who has to balance these interests. Yeah. We haven't spoken to our audiences. I don't know if there are questions or comments. We have run out of time so much. Are there any questions online? Are there any comments from our Zoom attendees, participants, anyone from the Facebook? Comments, questions?
There's a comment from Facebook from Mr. Ignatius. He asks, what should be the bottom line of any profit-inclined entity?
What should be the bottom line?
A profit-inclined entity, by definition, is a commercial entity. The difficulty, for example, of looking at having many stakeholders or many constituencies to serve when we implement the stakeholder theory is that for a small and medium enterprise, it may be a cost that they are not able to internalize. Because who is going for, because it means that it has to be reflected not only in the reporting, but in the activities. And small and medium enterprises are vulnerable. In most jurisdictions, they will tell you that the first 5 years are important because we do not often realize that most companies fail within 5 years. Those that we see that have been around for 10 years, 20 years, and 10 years, they've been run efficiently, yes, but the business failure rate is high. So when we say, okay, we're going to implement the stakeholder theory, we have to be mindful of that. A small private company, and that's why I was talking about that it depends, when we talk about the shareholder primacy, it depends on the type of companies or corporations we're dealing with. If it's private, it will apply a little less, especially because they may have very small profit margins. And if they have to incur expenses trying to satisfy different constituencies, they may not be able to survive commercially. And in answering that, and also in coming back to what you've said about let's say the alignment of the inclusive stakeholder theory with the Ubuntu, what is really informative, at least that's what I found, is that when we look at the empirical scholarship, and by empirical scholarship, I'm talking about what the scholars have written on the stakeholder theory when looking at how it is practiced and whether it succeeded, there is no consensus. But what is very clear is that not only in the North, in the global North, was the criticism we heard of. I mean, we spoke about Michael Jensen, but the criticism, and that's the interesting part, in developing countries, we're saying that it's not the people were not complaining so much about the norms, the values, look at all the stakeholders and so forth, but it's the implementation. But they linked the implementation to the norms by saying that the norms did not make it possible for effective implementation. Because whether it's in Southern Africa, I was at the conference where I served as the chair of a panel, and one of the panelists was Judge Dennis Davis, who's also a corporate scholar. He was actually saying the biggest criticism that they raised with the King Code was that it did not prevent state capture. If we have to adapt it in our context, we say, well, to what extent did the NAM Code or the King Code 4 prevent fish rot or fish core? So it's in the implementation, and I'm not going to say there's a final say on this. As I said, scholars are divided on whether it's really effective, but you will see that the complaint has been with the implementation.
Yeah,
and this is something we have to be careful, even with Ubuntu. Ubuntu sounds good, but is it necessarily the best policy to implement? How will it work in practice? For small and medium enterprises, implementing a multi-stakeholder approach may be more expensive than if they were solely pursuing profit making. So it's something to take into account as well.
Do you want to answer the question?
I mean, it's also very important. I mean, rules of engagement has to be established. Public-private partnership has to be put in place. We have a lot of...
Are we answering the question about what is the bottom line of a profit-making company?
For a private company, they cannot just go ahead with profitability without understanding the environmental context in which they operate in. And I do sit on some private boards as well. And the point I'm trying to drive at is that, you know, the integrated reporting, the annual integrated reporting has become so evolved that now it emphasizes not only profitability, but environmental, social, and governance goals. And I think from that point of view, your corporate social responsibility becomes too revolutionized towards the ESG approach that can help that even though you know as a bank or as a company, you are making profit. And that's the bottom line. Because, I mean, profits are bottom lines of private operators. They want to be profitable. But they want also to understand, do I contribute towards the environmental scaling of our company? And that is where the CSR issues come in, the ESG issues come in, and conforming to that broader social aspect in line with public-private partnership. It can also help. Because a private company will not really build a railroad and make money out of it. It's the public sector to do that.
And here again, if I may very briefly, I think it's also important to look at the size of the company, because we are talking about, you know, young, recent entrepreneurs. It's not likely that they have the kind of operations that the big, for example, shops like ShopRite and, you know, Spar, and they're not at the same level. So for them, especially if the profit margins are small, going beyond profit making may result in them, because there are trade-offs. I remember it was the economist Thomas Sowell who said that in economics there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. You have to know that if you decide to go this way, what you have lost is the opportunity B. So that is very important. And yes, Mr. Gaomab has mentioned also the example of a bank. We have to be also to take also into account that banks are known to be, the banking sector and the financial sector in Namibia, I mean, the banking industry and the financial sector in Namibia are known to be highly profitable, but they are also highly, recently it was, I think, the World Bank or the IMF who told the Namibian government that the banking sector is uncompetitive because you only have about 5 players. The profits they make are incredible. I mean, recently in the newspaper they were saying that Standard make 1 billion profit every single day. With not billion. Sorry, I think it's they gave a number. What they did is that they looked, because Standard Bank released their financials recently, and it was several. I think it was million profit, not billion, but they made profit close to 1 billion, if not exceeding that. So I'm not talking about revenue, just the profit, the net profit. Every single day, you are talking about at least 1 million. So can these companies engage or take into account all the stakeholders, like the workers, the low-income borrowers? Of course they can. But a small company, you know, that runs a bakery and they have small profit margins, if you tell them, oh no, you have also to take into account that those who, you know, those who provide you with the flour that you need to make the bread must also be taken into account in your decision makings and so forth. They may not have that luxury because the trade-offs here are just, you know, too high. Something that I wanted to add. I hope it makes sense.
Our time is apparently up. We have run out of time, but there was such a rich conversation, and it's created a lot more questions as well. But I hope we wanted to get to the point that it's not one versus the other, okay? And it's not that profit making is the problem. It's when we value that to the point that it creates short-term thinking, and therefore then we disregard the interest of the stakeholders. We disregard how our decisions affect the environment and the social context as well. So a fiduciary director, a director who is a good fiduciary, understands this. They understand that, yes, I'm here to enrich the shareholder, but I am also here to ensure the sustainability of this organization, because when we make decisions just to enrich the shareholder to the detriment of the organization will then not exist anymore anyway, and then therefore everybody loses. So I hope that that comes home, and I hope that in this conversation, you as viewers were able to get that as well. But there's so much more to be had. I think we've had some of these conversations before. Please do go follow us on our social platforms. These episodes are available. They've come since 2023. We've had these fireplace conversations. So please do go check on our YouTube channel to follow previous episodes. Again, thank you to 91 who's made this possible. One of the best asset management operators in the country and on the continent. Thank you so much, 91, for making this possible. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you for
your minds
us.
Are brilliant, and thank you for your time and being here tonight and making this conversation possible. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
All right. Is that a wrap? I don't know.
That brings us to the end of this conversation and the close of the 2020